We're glad everybody can be here on this Lord's Day and this Mother's Day. It is good to be thankful for the mothers that we have here with us. And it's good to remember the mothers that are no longer with us. It's good memories. As Jimmy was saying in his prayer, remember the good things that our mothers have taught us. We're glad to have Holly with us. Not Mandy, but Holly. We're glad Mandy's here too. But I made a mistake, and Holly hadn't forgotten it. That's all right. But we're glad to have you with us. We're glad everyone is with us today. We're glad you're with us. And it is Mother's Day. I heard a story this week about a mother, and it kind of reminded me of my mother. As a family is sitting around the supper table, and the little boy says, "Mom, is it all right to eat bugs?" And the mother says, "Son, there are certain things we do not talk about around the supper table. We can talk about that, but not right now." I can hear my mother telling me that sometimes. There's some things we don't talk about. So they finish their meal, and Mother's clearing up the plates, and she's getting ready to go. And she says, "Now, son, was there something you wanted to talk to me about?" He says, "Oh, that's okay. There was a bug in your soup, but it's gone now." Something to remember. But we do want to remember our mothers. We are going to be gone for a few weeks. We're going on vacation. We're going to be gone for 2 weeks, but 3 weekends. And Jim Dixon is going to fill in. And appreciate Jim for doing that. I know that y'all will support him and help him all you can. But while we're gone, one of the things is keep us informed of what's going on. We're going to be out and about, but we still want to keep up with everything that's going on. If somebody needs something or is in trouble, we do have a card over here to sign for Dana Popham. She's in the hospital in Amarillo, and hopefully they're hoping it's just a matter of some medication that they can get adjusted, and we can do that. But we do want to remember Dana as she's going through some hard times. We want to remember the Shields family. With Clayton in his services, and that family needs our prayers. Let's keep them in mind. We have been studying the fruit of the Spirit. And when we talk about the fruit of the Spirit, it is singular. Although there are many things listed, it is not a plural. They all go together. They all build together as we are transformed into the image of God. And as they are singular, we wanted to remember them. One of the things that struck me is several people said yesterday at the service, either during the service or after, is how Clayton liked simple things. And I think there's a lesson in that for all of us. Sometimes we try to make life complicated. We try to make God complicated. And I'm not saying we shouldn't study and we shouldn't learn, and there's always more to learn. I don't ever want people to think that there's not more to learn. But sometimes we try to make it complicated. And it's good to remember simpleness. Just a simple, authentic discipleship that we want to remember. And we can take a lesson from people who appreciate the simple things in life. And that's something we want to remember. As we look at this, we are at the end of our list. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And we're at self-control. And when we look at this, I think it's good that we keep in mind that the fruit of the Spirit, that Paul, when he writes this letter to the Galatians, he contrasts the fruit of the Spirit with the works of the flesh. They're kind of opposite of each other. And when we look at that, we see that when he talks about the works of the flesh. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. And we have this list, and we contrast that with the fruit of the Spirit that we looked at. And I think when we look at that, we see that these works of the flesh are out of control. People that are out of control, as opposed to the self-control that we see with the fruit of the Spirit. Self-control is not something that is unique to this passage. It's throughout the Bible. And when you look in Titus, Paul is writing to his protege, Titus, and teaching him how to be a missionary. That when you go out on mission, these are the things you teach. And he talks to him about, what do you teach the young men? Self-control. What do you teach the old ladies? Self-control. And what do you teach the old ladies to teach the young ladies? Self-control. And what do you teach to the old men? Self-control. That's not the only thing, but that is in the list of all that you teach, from the old men to the young women. Everybody is self-control. When I was reading that passage in Titus, it reminded me of an event that happened a few years ago. When I think about it, sometimes I think it's just a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. But when I really think about it, I realize that it's a whole lot closer to 30 years ago than it is to 3 years ago. But this was before it was DA or judge or anything like that. I was in court, and we got to telling stories, and we heard a new story. And it was hilarious. They were these 2 old men that were cattlemen. And they had a fence that they shared between their properties. And the fence got down for one reason or another, and the cattle from one old man got in on the other old man. And so the old man who had the cattle on him gathers them up, puts them in the lot, and he calls his neighbor and says, "Your cows are in my lot, come get them. Fix the fence." The guy does. He comes and get them, takes them home, but he says, "You know, there's a lot of old mama cows in that lot, but there's not many calves. I had more calves than that. I think that neighbor took my calves and took them to the sale." And so he makes a complaint. But the question is, well, how many calves did you have? Well, I really don't know. But it should be more than that. Were they branded? No, they weren't branded. Were they ear tagged? No, they weren't. Ear notched, anything to designate them as yours. And he says, "No, I hadn't done any of that yet, but I know I had more calves." And so the sheriff says, "There's not much I can do. If you don't know how many you had or didn't have them designated, not much I can do." But these 2 old men end up running into each other at Walmart in Childress. And they begin to have words, and these 2 old men get in a fist fight. And it's on camera. And it gets played in court. And we're looking at this and says, those 2 old men, they couldn't have hurt each other. If they really just stood there and let each other hit each other, they just couldn't have hurt each other. And so we thought this was hilarious. One of the things about it in Texas, if you get in a fight out here in the parking lot, and you just have 2 guys and they're hitting each other, and nobody picks up a rock or a stick or a knife, that's just simple assault. Class A misdemeanor. You don't go to prison, just probably a fine, maybe probation, maybe you get sent home and say, "Grow up." But in Texas, if it is assault on an elderly individual, that becomes a felony. And for the purpose of the statute, 65 is the key. If you are 65, you're elderly. If you're not 65, you're not. And it turned out that one of these old men was 65, and the other one was 64. So one of them got a felony, and one of them got a misdemeanor. And that didn't seem right. And I actually got hired to represent the young one. But it worked out. Nobody got in too much trouble. But the thing about it is I was thinking about this. And I'm that old now. And I remember laughing at those 2 old men. They couldn't hurt anything. And now here I am. I'm right there. And so that just made me think that sometimes it's a matter of perspective of whether you're the old man or the young man. But Paul told them all to be in self-control. And one of the things that we read there is, "Against such things there is no law." And as we look, we see that so often the lack of self-control is what gets you in trouble sometimes. And we're going to look now at an example in James chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. about how important it is to have control. This is talking about control of your tongue and how that can have such an impact. Now, many of you should not become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also, the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great is a forest set ablaze by such a small fire! And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed, and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing, my brothers. These things ought not to be. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or grapevines produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. And we know that saying something carelessly it can cause pain to others and can get us in trouble. And I know I'm speaking from experience that I have said things that I regret, that sometimes I might call somebody Mandy instead of Holly, and I had to pay for it for a long time. But we see it all the time in the media, in the news, that some famous person, either a politician or an athlete or an actor, some famous person, will say something stupid. And they'll get called on the carpet for it. You're sure of that. And really there's two ways that that's handled. And sometimes people will say, I made a mistake. I was wrong. I ask for forgiveness for those that I hurt. I'll try not to do that again and I'll be better. And then you have the other side that may say, I didn't say that. And then when it's shown, well, we think you did. Well, maybe I'm misquoted, or I'm taken out of context, or you're twisting what I said. But it goes all the time that people say things that they carelessly miss, and it causes pain. And self-control is one way that can hopefully be prevented. I see it all the time in court. You cannot have a domestic case without Facebook. Somebody will be on the stand and they'll ask the person, say, did you say this? No, I never said that. Was this your Facebook page from 3 years ago? Well, yeah. Would you read this little portion? Well, I guess I did say it. It happens every time. That people, you'd think would learn that your ex-spouse is watching your Facebook page and your tweets and your Twitter and all your accounts. And whatever you say, they're saving. And it ends up in court the next time you go. That goes without saying. We can't have a case anymore without Facebook or a tweet or a text or something. And people say things in the heat of the moment that gets them in trouble. They say things when they're not thinking that get them in trouble. It is a careless word. But one of the things that we have is when we look at Galatians, we've been looking at the fruit of the Spirit there in Galatians. Let's remember that it's why Paul is writing to them. That people have come into the church at Galatia and are teaching the people what is wrong. And that is even a worse way to not have control of your tongue. Is if you are teaching what is wrong, particularly from the Bible, there are serious consequences to that. And when we want to guard our tongue, let's remember that that's even more important. And when we look at this fruit of the Spirit, that Paul is writing to a congregation that's having a problem. And if you have that fruit of the Spirit, within the congregation, not just within the individuals, but within the congregation, you have that peace and joy and love, is that you can heal whatever rift may be there. When there is a problem, it can be healed if you have the fruit of the Spirit. And that's one of the things he's writing to them about. But when we talk about teaching the wrong things, let's remember what James said there. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. And I think a lot of people will say, man, I'm glad I didn't teach Sunday school, or I'm glad I'm not teaching this. But I want to ask you something. How many of you think that you are not teachers? Because we all are, in one way or another. We may teach a class at school, or we may teach a class here in church, or we may teach at home with our children, our grandchildren, or whoever may be there. And we may teach them about what we say. And that's what we've been talking about. But you also may teach by the life that you live. I guarantee you, you are teaching. You are either teaching by what you say, or by the example you set and how you live. There are none of us that are not teaching. There's an old story back in Esther. And I know we know the story of Esther. That the king is going to kill the Jews. And Mordecai goes to Queen Esther and is trying to convince her to go to the king and speak on behalf of the Jews. She doesn't want to do it. She's afraid. And Mordecai says to her, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That's such a powerful verse. And I want to ask you to ask yourselves, who knows whether each one of you has not come to the kingdom for such a time as this that we're facing? We're all facing challenges. We're facing challenges as a world, as a country, as an individual. And you have. The answer to that question is yes. You are here for this time. For the people in your life, you are here. For the people that you have to be with is why you are here. Whether that is to heal your life, or your neighbor's life, your loved one's life, or your country's life. There is a time that you are here. And we want to remember that. And when we think of controlling our tongue and controlling our lives, self-control is not a new idea, not unique to Christianity. There are lots of philosophers over the years that have talked about self-control. We've talked in here before about Aristotle, his list of virtues, and he wrote a lot about virtue. And one of them he wrote about was self-control, that he believed strongly that we needed to be in control of our emotions, in control of our actions, and in control of our lives. But to Aristotle, it was a matter of will. It was that you had enough strong will that you make a determination, I'm going to do this. Despite what I might want to say, I'm not. But let's look at what Jesus has to say here in Matthew 12. Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person, out of his good treasure, brings forth good. And the evil person, out of his evil treasure, brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. When we look at what Jesus says here, it's about what's in our hearts that comes out. It's not about us having the great iron will. And I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't try. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But it's a matter of who you are. What is your identity? What is in your heart is what's going to come out. And Jesus is telling us, if our heart is right, then our lives will be right. And that's one of the main differences when we see what is Aristotle saying and what is Jesus saying, is that Aristotle says that it's all about us. What can I do? How strong is my will? And when we look at what Paul says, what Jesus says, it's not about that. It's not about us. It's about Christ and about being transformed into the image of Christ. And again, Jesus says this is out of that statement. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. It's what's in our hearts. And one of the things is, and I know some of you can, a lot of you can. Remember Bright, and one of his favorite verses was Proverbs 23:7. As a man thinks, so is he. And I can hear Bright saying it, I can see him saying it, and he said this a lot. This was one of his favorite verses. And it's a good one. Because if we think, as Jesus told us, what's in our heart is what's going to come out. What's in our heart is what's going to determine what we do and what we say. And here it is. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And we think of Paul when he says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, is there any excellence? Is there anything worthy of praise? Think about these things. So what we think about determines where our heart is. Are we thinking about ourselves? Are we thinking about others? Are we loving God and loving others? What we think about matters. And one of the things that we have with Jesus is we have communion with Jesus. We're about to partake of communion. And one of the things he asks us to do is to remember him, to think about Jesus, just as we see here, just as we see in Proverbs. And when we take a communion, Christ is with us. We're able to remember him. We're able to remember his sacrifice, and we're able to remember and think about his teachings and the example that he set. That's one of the opportunities that we have during the Lord's Supper, which we will take just in a few minutes. But also, we are here for one another. Those fruit of the Spirit are about us and about putting them in our hearts. But it's also about us together. That as a community of people, we should have the fruit of the Spirit as a community also. And let's remember that that is true, and that we can help one another in whatever we need. And we all need healing in one way or another. Whether that's coming to Christ and putting on Christ, or whether that is trying to heal the grief and the sorrow, or whether that is to go on and go forward. And that's why we're here. And we want to ask if anyone has a need, if you have something you wish to pray, for us to pray about, if you have something you wish to talk about, we want to do that either publicly or privately. Or if you wish to come forward and to put on Christ, if you would come while we stand and as we sing.